Hello, welcome to NeilScribe. Looking back, the story of the iPod was merely a prelude to the iPhone. But for a brief 7-year period or so, the iPod was ingrained in our culture and was part of sweeping changes happening during that time. The adoption of CD burners, peer-to-peer file sharing, and high-speed broadband internet paved the way for the iPod phenomenon. But interestingly, the initial purpose of the iPod was merely to help sell more Macs. You see, iPod computer sales were down 33% in the year 2000 compared to 1999, while PC sales were growing. This was because Apple was late to feature CD burners on their computers. Apple scrambled to make up for missing the curve and developed a new strategy. The Mac would become a digital media hub. So Steve Jobs had engineers work on software to edit and manage digital media. Apple purchased an MP3 program called SoundJam, which served as the foundation for iTunes. And during this process, Apple realized that existing MP3 players were terrible. And they realized that they could create a superior MP3 player compared to what was available, and they developed the iPod. The iPod's initial release was poor. Many critics thought it was too expensive and overhyped. By 2002, only 78,000 iPods were sold. If the iPod was going to rise to its potential, Apple was going to have to release it to PC users. That meant abandoning the iPod's original purpose to sell more Macs. Apple's executives pushed to release iPod to the PC, but Jobs pushed back at first, saying that Microsoft users would have the iPod over his dead body. In the end, Apple smartly released the iPod for Windows in 2002, opening it up to the other 95% of the market. But Apple had one distribution decision that was puzzling at first sight. Apple chose not to sell iPods at Walmart or Best Buy, America's biggest retailer and electronics chain. This boils down to branding and marketing. Apple wanted the iPod to be a premium brand, and they didn't want the iPod to be associated with cheap electronics found at Walmart. They also did not want the iPod to be stripped down to a specification chart at Best Buy where it would be compared to inferior products with more features. You see, those charts wouldn't showcase the user experience that Apple worked so hard to achieve. The iPod was designed with one thing in mind: user experience, and anything that got in the way was thrown out. FM tuner, out. Bluetooth, out. Replaceable battery, out. Jobs rolled the design team hard and insisted that getting to a song or a function on the iPod should take no more than 3 clicks. Little details like these aren't shown on specification cards at retailers, so Apple decided to open its own stores. To help with this endeavor, Jobs recruited former CEO of The Gap, Millard Drexler, and also recruited business executive Ron Johnson, who was credited for making the Target brand fresh. Apple's formula for the iPod was now in place, and they were unbeatable. The iPod dominated the MP3 market, selling 100 million units by 2007. It fought off so many companies trying to take away its market share, and we're gonna zero in on 2 of the companies, starting with Sony. Of all of the companies competing in personal audio, Steve Jobs respected and feared Sony the most. Sony was still the king of consumer electronics back then, and it had a 2-year head start on Apple, releasing 2 MP3 players in 1999. Being the force behind the Walkman and CDs, Sony was in the position to continue its run with MP3. Unfortunately for Sony, the company had 2 significant distractions that allowed Apple to take over the market. First was leadership. Sony's legendary co-founder Akio Morita, who was Steve Jobs' role model by the way, stepped down as the company's chairman in 1995 and passed away in 1999. By the time the iPod was released, Sony was led by Nobuyuki Ade, who lacked the charisma and respect that the founding generation possessed. Because of this, Ade delegated significant decision-making down to the individual divisions of the company, which made it challenging to execute long-term strategies. And the second distraction was Sony's music entertainment division, brought by the acquisition of CBS Records. Remember, peer-to-peer file sharing was destroying the music industry, and Sony's interest in protecting its music business conflicted with creating user-friendly MP3 players. So Sony could not quite get the formula right to compete with the iPod. The 2 players released in 1999 were far inferior to the iPod. The memory stick Walkman was developed by Sony's personal audio division, and the music clip was developed by Sony's Vaio division without any collaboration, and the result was 2 products with its own strengths, but both inferior to the iPod. Sony regrouped in 2004 and released the network Walkman, but its music business hurt the product big time. Sony did not want its products enabling file sharing, so it made the network Walkman incompatible with MP3 format, which is what users wanted. And the network Walkman's music selection was limited because competing music companies did not want to sell their music on Sony's music store. A lot of things had to go wrong for Sony to lose its seat on its throne. And a lot did go wrong, and their seat was lost. And now there's Microsoft, and for that we must rewind back to Walmart and Best Buy. Remember, retailers were cut off from the iPod and they wanted a piece of the action. They turned to Microsoft to see if Microsoft could develop a product that could compete with the iPod. Microsoft did have an answer, and it was the Portable Media Center, or PMC. PMC wasn't a device, it was a software platform that would allow Apple's competitors to offer not just music, but videos as well. By 2004, Creative, iRiver, and Samsung released PMCs, unknowing that Apple was just a year away from including video on the iPod. But that did not matter, the PMCs were dead on arrival because of the lack of video content. Microsoft did not realize that the majority of people did not want to deal with transferring movies from DVDs to watch it on the go on their devices. If they wanted to watch movies on the go, they would simply buy portable DVD players. Microsoft needed to provide easily accessible video content. It managed to strike a deal with Major League Baseball and Cinema Now, an online rental service with only 200 movies and TV shows. And that wasn't enough content to justify the price of PMC devices. So PMC failed and Microsoft had a decision to make. Should they compete directly with Apple with its own device? And they chose to compete. The sleeping giant that was Microsoft was awake. But as far as stories go, this matchup could have made for a compelling final act, but it was anticlimactic to say the least. This time, Microsoft's failure was branding. Microsoft was 5 years late to the scene. By then, the iPod was iconic. It was on Oprah's favorite things, and seemingly every other celebrity had one. At that time, if the iPod brand was a Marvel character, it was Iron Man. And if Microsoft was going to seriously compete with Apple, it needed to release something innovative and exciting like Thor or Black Panther. Instead, it released Hawkeye, good enough to be an Avenger but not have a solo film. That is what they released in the Zune. It was a quality device with a good interface, but it wasn't exciting. At its highest point, the Zune reached 10% market share of hard drive-based MP3 players and declined after that. Microsoft, like Sony and many other companies that we didn't cover, failed to release a product that could be considered a legitimate rival to the iPod. And it was clear that Apple was there to stay. Like Sony before them, the throne was theirs to lose. And there was no beating Apple in design and branding. All you could do was hope to copy them. But that's a story for another video. Alright, that's all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed your journey. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. I am Neil Scribe, and I'll see you on the next journey.